And for open competition, we have Nous Academy. For professional, we have Johailee. On the third channel, I am Police. I will be sharing talent with me are Dave from formerly of Taylor's College, Imran Adeo from PTJ, Regina Matthews from BAC, Declan from Kerry, so I don't know that too. Mr. Savinade from Help, Nalpa from IEM, who's that? Tony from BAC, and Albert from UMass. And you know that this house reflects the norm of individuals and authorities reaching out and actively stopping individuals who are attempting suicide. I like to call upon the Prime Minister. Woo.
Testing. Will you guys hear me like this? Testing. Testing. Test. Okay, what? Test. In cases of suicide, we say on site opening government that the victims who opt in to suicide are in a vast majority of instances at the very edge of their life. This means that they have probably been through years of depression. This means that they have probably been through a conflict in which just makes them think that their life has no point in living as a whole. The point in which you force them to not go into suicide, because that's the only way in which they are able to opt out of their suffering, is when you pull them back in the vicious cycle, and you force them to go through every single trauma that they have previously trapped them in a sphere in which they cannot opt out from. Imagine your family has died, your children has died in a car crash in which you were involved in. You were the driver, and maybe you are also disabled. You are guilty of two things. Firstly, you are disabled, therefore you cannot function normally. Secondly, you are the cause of why your family has died to begin with. There is no point of you living your life knowing that your children already is not there, knowing that your wife has died in a car crash in which you caused. You saying that, look, it doesn't matter, there are other greater things in life, is a direct insult towards the very mentality of these individuals to begin with. We don't think it's fair for you to push them back in that vicious cycle. Hence, the stance from site opening government is simple, is that we would like to give the choice towards individuals to choose suicide simply because it's a life in which they should have autonomy over. Secondly, these sorts of norms are like, help will still be there, but it shouldn't be made mandatory, right? So that's part of the norm. I'll explain that later, right? So there are two things I'll talk to you about in my speech, right? The first question I'm going to answer, starting from Prime Minister, is that what is the psyche of victims of suicide? We think these are individuals in a vast majority of instances, are individuals who already have the perception in which they have no ability to go through their lives already, right? Why do we say so? When we compare the mentality between a normal individual and an individual wanting to opt into suicide, we think it's extremely different. And it's unfair for you to say that these are people who are irrational also. Why? Because as a normal, sane individual, I will be less likely to cut my hand because I know that that might lead me to death. I'm less incentivized to take a poisonous drink because I know that I might die, and before I die, I might feel extremely pain, or I might go through suffering, right? But recognizing that all of these things are disregarded by individuals who want to opt into suicide, we say that it's reasonable to say that these are people who already don't have a regard for whatever that comes after them already. They are put in a position in which they are at the very edge of their life. The depression that they are going through pushes them towards this decision. Which means, if you fall off a building, maybe you might fail, maybe you might succeed. Assuming you fail, you would still go through the same amount of suffering that you might have now, and it will be escalated. Given that these are individuals who don't give a regard about all of this already, it's reasonable to say that this individual is extremely desperate and there is no point of opt-out for these people already. We think, on a second level, why is it harmful for this norm of authorities to force individuals or to help individuals to go through suicide to exist, right? Firstly, in a country in which suicide is illegal, we think if this person is persuaded to not go through the process of suicide, then this person is more likely to put behind bars because this is a criminal attempt. Because suicide is a crime in that country, because apparently killing your life is something that is a crime also, right? Which means under that paradigm, it exacerbates the very harm in which you put these individuals behind bars, exacerbating the trauma that they have already been through. But secondly, what is the psyche of individuals when they are standing on the ledge of that high building? After going through maybe perhaps 30 years of depression after that conflict and after that car crash, the point in which that suicide victim is able to feel the most closure and the most freedom is when that person stands on that very ledge and when that person jumps off the building. That form of that suicide is a escaping platform for that individual to opt out from all of those sorts of depression and all of those sorts of trauma that a person has previously been trapped in. You pulling them back into life means that you are pulling them back into the same vicious cycle in which entraps them for the past 30 years as a whole, right? And this is in a country in which suicide is illegal to begin with, right? Legal to begin with, which means all of those things that have previously traumatized them make them want to go through suicide. You don't respect their choice of ending their life, they are unable to survive, but you pull them back into the same vicious cycle and say that, look, we don't care if you're feeling very painful. We don't care if you're suffering. We don't care if you're a stage 4 cancer patient. We want you to live because you just cannot take your life. I don't get that logic, right? If that person is feeling extreme suffering, that person should be able to go through suicide, and that person should be able to be given that choice to opt out of that suffering. But before I move on to my second argument, sure, go ahead.
So it's a blatant lie that individuals who are caught in trying to commit suicide are put behind bars. They are given rehabilitation methods, and explain to us why these rehabilitation methods will further harm the victims.
In a country in which suicide is illegal, you are put behind bars for a failed suicide attempt. In a country where suicide is legal, precisely what are those kind of rehabilitations? These people are placed in mental asylums, guys. Mental asylums is a form of torture towards these individuals, recognizing that the point in which they opt into suicide is to opt out of the very suffering that they are in. The point in which you take them out of suicide and you put them out in mental asylums, you label them as individuals who have psychological problems. You label them as an insult towards society. It's more likely for these individuals to be discriminated. It's more likely for these individuals to feel more suffering under your side. Defend that in LO. But secondly, right, in most cases, we think all of these Good Samaritan laws, similar towards the norm of authorities persuading individuals to not opt into suicide, is kind of mandatory for individuals. Why? Because in a case in which you see somebody jump off the building and you as a person capable of talking to that person didn't take the initiative to do so, the very cause of that death will more likely to be placed upon you. It is more likely for society to react in a way in which say that, why didn't you talk to that person beforehand? Maybe you could have prevented a suicide. Maybe you could have prevented that person from falling into that ocean. But you recognize this fact. It takes extreme courage for a person to jump into the sea and save that person who wants to end his life. It takes extreme courage to climb up to the same 100th floor to talk to that person who may potentially drag you down there also. Given that there are also individuals out there who are able to carry out these sorts of processes, following the mandatory and the norm in which forces individuals to care for suicide victims. Given that those discrimination exists with these sorts of norms because this is a value in which mandates you to do so, we don't think it's fair for you to place a blame upon these individuals given that they are unable to do anything at the point in which that person jumped off that building. So there are two things I've told you. Firstly, respect the choices of the victim, because that victim is a person which has no capabilities to survive. Secondly, don't place a blatant blame upon individuals who have no capability to save that person. For this, I'm proud to propose. Thank you. Testing. We feel that as a human being, we must always take active measures to ensure that we can protect an individual's life when we are given the opportunity to do so. We believe that when a person is attempting suicide, we must always take the right stance and the right moral high ground to actively try and save this individual, because you and me, we are brothers in arms. We believe that at the end of the day, as human beings, we must always become the individual who has to be the good person. We must always make sure that we take care of our brothers and sisters and any individual within society. We do not want to take the approach the side of government is taking, because it's very extreme. Before I move on to my main argumentation in regards to human morality and why under their side, human morality will be completely lost, let's deal with a couple of things under their side of the house. Ryan came up and argued a couple of things that only proves to you why a person should be allowed to commit suicide. His own justification of why a person should not be allowed to save another person is because it might create a vicious cycle of a person going through a certain level of suffering. I will further disprove that in my speech later. But the most important thing that is extremely problematic from his speech is the treatment of an individual when he wants to commit suicide but fails to do so in a country that where suicide is illegal. Here's the thing. Suicide is illegal, but it is decriminalized. Why? The rationale here is if you want to punish an individual who wants to commit suicide, it's better just to let him commit suicide in the first place. Why else do you think at this point in time, when a person who is going through suicide and he's stopped, he's put under number one, suicide watch, but number two, so many rehabilitation methods among the months to ensure that his psyche is able to recover. It's extremely weird when he comes out and saying that a state doesn't want you to commit suicide. Because if you do try to commit suicide and you fail to do so, let's punish you even more. That makes absolutely no sense. And his characterization falls there. Rebuttals will be integrated in my arguments. Now first, before I move on, let's understand the psyche of a suicide victim. Because his understanding is that individual is very depressed. We agree that at this point in time, a person who attempts to go for suicide is depressed, is sad, and feels alone and feels trapped in a cage. But the most important part is because the experiences that he's gone through has put him in a position where he feels like he cannot trust the world. That's why he never goes and actively goes on to try and find support from his friends and his family, because he feels like his friends and family can never support him at the end of the day. We understand that the characterization that he provided in his opening line was very extreme. A person who ended up killing his family as well as killing another family, that's very extreme. And there's a very minority of cases. And even then, we still want to say the individual. The majority of cases is very simple. Individuals who go and attempt suicide, please sit down, who attempt suicide, individuals who feel depressed, who feel that the life is not going as what he feels the life is supposed to give him. And feel that he has shut himself in a cage of isolation that he does not want to break out from. And we feel that as human beings, we must take an active step to make him break out of that cage and provide him the rehabilitation that he needs. Moving on to my first argument, but before that, yes.
The treatment you provide towards these suicide victims who have failed prevents suicide from happening and therefore prolongs the very trauma that these individuals experience. Given that, it is vague whether this person will be able to recover from that trauma. How is it fair for you assuming that person is unable to recover?
It's so funny because apparently rehabilitation is not supposed to treat trauma, but it's supposed to treat a person crying. We are on the side of government, we are on the side of opposition. When it comes to rehabilitation programs, the objective is to ensure that this person is able to integrate back into society. What do I mean by this? Integration in terms of the ability to function and cooperate within society, being able to trust, being able to get over the problems that you faced before. Rehabilitation is supposed to change you to become a better person, not whatever side of what his POI is referring to. Let's move on to towards my argumentation in regards to human morality.
Because exactly what is human morality? The idea of being able to love, being able to be kind towards an individual, just out of the sake of your own heart. The importance here is that you show that you actively care for an individual, which is where morality is drawn upon, which is where rules and laws dictated upon why should we take care of another person is drawn upon, based upon the morality of an individual, based upon love and care. The important part here is that on the side of opposition, we feel that celebrating something as the norm of protecting individuals further celebrates and supports the idea of human morality. Because why so? We believe that in the end of the day, being able to go beyond what you are as an individual and just go for the sake of protecting another individual, taking that courage to wanting to jump into the river, taking the courage to going up to the rooftop of a 100-story building to try and save an individual. That human morality is an important thing that we must retain within a society. Please sit down. But this important thing here is that the impact that comes upon this is very massive. Why so? Because the impact is number one, if we by any chance fail to wanting to save this individual, because we believe that we cannot always save everyone. We feel that at the very least, the last memory of an individual who is attempting suicide is knowing or seeing or even hearing that a person actually wanted to care for him. And that important memory, even at the very least, provides him a better death than what side of government provides him, where that person does not care or no one cares for him at all. Sit down. But more importantly, when it comes towards an individual being able to assist this, being able to save this individual, the help that we can provide him is a lot more massive. Why so? Sit down. The help here, at the end of the day, is being able to show him that support exists. Being able to show him that there are people who care for him. Brothers, sisters, family members, friends. People who actively care for this individual. But because of the experiences that he has, he decided to closet himself, to isolate himself in his own cage. We do not want to further that kind of mentality within society. Because at the end of the day, these people was never really shown about the care that exists within the world. And we want to create a norm that people actually exist and they actually care for you. Because on a comparative, on the side of government side, when this is something that is not enough, we feel society as a whole will never care about their neighbors, never care about their friends. Anything that occurs upon an individual, regardless of whether it's a friend or a stranger, is a person that they do not have to take their active hands on. Because it's not my problem, why should I care? Because that's the kind of mentality that exists on the side of government's case, where they do not want to save an individual's life because they feel like, oh, he's choosing to do so. Let's not care for him. It creates a mentality within society that, number one, individuals who are depressed will always remain depressed. They are always alone and will never receive love and care in the entire world. We feel that will further increase the amount of suicide cases and the suicide attempts alongside the government's case because of the fact that they feel that the world is always against them. We do not want to show that the world is always against them. We want to show that the world will always love them. Yeah.
Individuals who attempt suicide are people in deep depression and suffering. Understanding that people who attempted suicide have also exhausted all means of trying to recover from that depression. These are people who have tried to console their families or also tried to do any other sort of methods in order to try to rehabilitate themselves, but have failed. These people have come to an extreme measure in which they are forced to attempt suicide. So you engage in both grounds. We will also agree to a certain extent that most people who attempt suicide are extremely hard, who have faced extreme suffering in same circumstances, but we will also tell you why. If it's a minute reason for them to attempt suicide, why it is still okay. I have two questions to answer in my speech. Firstly, will these individuals ever recover from depression from opening opposition's rehabilitation? But secondly, do people have an obligation to save people from suicide attempts? Firstly, will the individuals ever recover from their depression? Because opening opposition's method or alternative was to show that support existed through rehabilitation methods, and they agreed that suicide is illegal. So, but how do rehabilitation methods works for suicide individuals or people who try to attempt suicide? Understand that the rehabilitation, and especially in a world where suicide is illegal, the state will do whatever it takes to prevent that person from attempting suicide again. So you can throw that person to prison and give him rehabilitation, but you also must ensure that the person don't kill himself in that prison. So then people will be more likely to be locked up or cuffed, so they don't even try to attempt suicide in that prison. This is a form of torture for these individuals who have been extremely depressed. You put them in the prison, you give them a rehabilitation, but cuff them up, give them no restrictions, give them no ability to console themselves. So your rehabilitation don't work. It doesn't become intimate, it doesn't become useful because you're forcing them into something that they don't want to be. But secondly, there have been extremely this misrepresentative Ryan's argument about how when a person tries to attempt suicide but fails in that point in his mental state, right? So when a person tries to attempt suicide, when he's at that age, understand that this person has faced a lot of suffering and a lot of depression. The point where a person tries to attempt suicide, whether he succeeds or not is not the problem, but when he wants to jump off that ledge, that is when that person feels the most amount of happiness, the most amount of freedom from his constricted suffering. That is when that person feels happiness. But when you ask people, when you ask individuals to console that person, to bring him back, to try to convince him to pull him back, and then sending him to prison, that is when that person will feel even more depression. From an extremely happy state, you pull him back to a state of depression that he can no longer control himself. We say that depression is much more worse on their side and on a comparative. The second question I would like to ask is, two people have an obligation. They say that they need people to help these individuals in order for them to integrate back into society. I have two things I want to talk about. Number one, why do people commit suicide? So this is where I engage on him when you talk about minute crimes and minute harms that person want to attempt suicide, right? I understand that a chunk of Brian's argument was also not rebutted by their side, right? These people are a person who feels suffering, who feels depression. So be it whether it's an extreme circumstance that he has been to, the viscerality of how the person feels is something you must take also into consideration. Because I might feel the amount of suffering that I might feel as a rich person might be so much more compared to a poor person also, right? So the optimal amount of happiness that I can find is not there. Because I can feel amount of suffering even if I lost my lost my blazer, right? Or if I lose this tournament, I feel like I want to kill myself, right? So it doesn't matter. A person who feels that amount of depression and harm, and this is important, note that this person who feels this harm, be it minute, is in imminent harm, is in imminent depression. The person feels depression right now. So be it whether the person is rational or irrational, we will give him the ability to free himself from all this happiness, right? So we think this is the harm that we are minimizing on our side. Secondly, what about the norms, right? We see that Hazim didn't do well in tackling about the norms. What he was saying is that it's good to talk about the norms, it's good to propagate that norm, right? So understand the situation in which a person has to save another person from attempted suicide. You either have to dive into the sea to save that person, or go up 100 floors to stop that person to console themselves. These people have not consented or have an obligation to save people who are attempting suicide. These people might not be able to cope, or just don't have the ability to convince these people from attempting suicide. Understand that they also considered that they cannot save everybody's life even if attempted suicide. If they cannot save everybody's life, and if that person tries to save that person from attempting suicide, but he fails, that is when the innocent civilian or innocent individual fails, will be discriminated by individuals outside of his friends, his family, and all those kind of things, right? You're putting him in more suffering. Wait a moment. But on a comparative, we say that on our side, if we don't have that norm, right, we say that help can also occur whether they want or don't want to. The thing is, when you mandate a norm, when you propagate that norm, this is when the person will face even more discrimination if I fail to do so. So if that person is drowning, I have to jump into that sea, I have to save him from drowning, right? Yes.
If a person consented was trying to partake in the dangerous event just to save another person's life, why is that choice illegitimate?
That choice is not illegitimate. What I'm saying then is that norm will create a lot of other discrimination platforms to empower, to give chances for individuals to criticize him as an individual who failed to stop him from suicide, right? That is harmful. You want to save that person, be it. But this is harmful when you force people to save what the norm does is firstly forcing individuals to save other people who are attempting suicide, but also saying that people who attempt suicide are bad, it's illegal, and that's why you shouldn't attempt suicide. That's why both of our rights arguments fit in this circumstance, right? But you also say on a parallel, right? The reason why we don't really allow people to commit suicide, whether they want to help or don't want to help. The thing is this, right? When in times of for certain situations for economic crisis where I cannot feed myself, but I still owe a duty to society. This is why what they're doing is they're forcing these individuals to continue helping the state or continue helping what they want, right? So you as a state are arbitrating innocent individuals who is not the state who's helping these individuals. You're shifting your burden to force these individuals to stop people from attempting suicide. What we say now is an unrealistic or unreasonable thing that the state is doing for arbitrating their agency over the lives of individuals and what they must do in order to stop people from attempting suicide. The conclusion is simple, right? We see that these people can do whatever they want. Don't stop them, don't create a norm.
Hello. 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 Can you hear me? We think a world where you see kindness in the form of people trying to save other people's lives because we value the humanity, we value the life in here, and we all see the warmth within this world, is one where people would rather live in compared to a world which is cold and doesn't care about other people's lives. We think in that kind of paradigm, more people are likely to commit suicide. But first off, let's clarify a few things which was largely misconstrued by side-opening government. What are these? One, they told us that apparently people who commit suicide would suddenly be sent to jail and be chained up. One, that's already not allowed under current law. Even for other criminals, you can't chain them up and tie them to the wall 24/7. One, that's torture, which already isn't allowed. But furthermore, let's recognize something. When exactly can you punish someone and send them to jail? So assuming the worst case where you actually can send someone to jail because he actually tried to commit suicide and failed, what happens? Because one, there needs to be clear when you want to punish someone, there needs to be clear what it means is that person actually tried to commit suicide. This means the person actually jumped off the building and failed. What this means is this kind of punishments are more likely to happen within their paradigm because no one's going to stop that person, and when that person fails, he's sent to jail. Compared to our side, when hey, if that good Samaritan is able to stop that person from even committing that suicide or even committing that act as it said, you need to recognize that at that point of time, the government can't even charge them to begin with. That means you can't send them to jail, you're more likely to send them to the actual support structures that they need. But what kind of rehabilitation do we have for people who want to commit suicide in the first place? Look, it's not torture, but instead there's a lot of stuff like counseling and stuff, like actual group work where we help them get back on their feet and stop being depressed. Because Benjamin apparently claimed that people who are depressed will never be able to come out of depression. We think that's false because every person who is depressed out there can actually be helped. And we recognize it in today's world where we actually give them more support. Even for young kids, we don't tell them to die. We give them support and make sure they get out of their depression. Furthermore, they misconstrued and they told us that apparently we'll blame people who can't save them. One, let's recognize something. People recognize that sure, as much as you're going to risk your life to save that person, there are limits. If it's going to mean that you die in the process of saving him, no one's going to blame you because sure, you need to still value your life. We think that kind of argument is misconstrued and largely falls within today's debate. But lastly, he told us that apparently hope that it's likely that we are able to rehabilitate that person and make sure that he gets back and it's actually happy in the long run. We think that's something we are willing to take. Because if they ask, what if they can't? Hey, we are willing to take the chance because we think, on a balance, at least we're able to save more people and get them out of depression compared to the other side, who allows every single person, whether they are rational or irrational, to die. Furthermore, let's recognize what Hazim said, which we never responded to. When we talk to you about stuff, such as whether these people are rational or not, we clearly told you, and we walked you through his life, when we tell you, sure, this person may have lost a lot. He may have lost his family, lost his job. What happens then? It means he's crowded by a lot of emotion, and usually this means you're deep with lots of emotion, and it's harder for you to think clearly because we recognize that the moment you're so crowded with emotion, you're more likely to be dominated by your emotion. Your action is likely to be influenced by your emotion. That means you're irrational to begin with. Ryan said, no rational person will cut off their head. Exactly. This means it's for people who want to jump off are largely thought to be irrational. Even if some are irrational, we're willing to take the chance. I've got two arguments today, but before that, yes.
It doesn't matter whether the person is rational, irrational, recoverable, or not. Understand that this person is facing imminent suffering which is unbearable for this person. Why are you willing to force him into doing something that he doesn't want to?
Because one, we don't think he actually made a rational choice in wanting to kill his life, understanding life and death. Once you die, you can't come back. But two, you need to recognize that at least we save him in the long run. And we're able, there's a high chance of us being able to protect him, being able to make sure he gets back on his feet. We're willing to take that chance from the get-go. I've got two arguments for you today. I'm not taking any of your eyes. Stay simple. One, the wider benefit. On the first level, when Hazim talked to you about stuff as to how other people see, because you recognize when people see and recognize that other people want to actively help you, this means we actually value your life. We value your humanity, your soul as a whole. What does this mean? It means for an individual who wants to commit suicide, we clearly characterize to you, a lot of them have lost hope in the world because they feel that no one's out there is going to help them, no one out there is going to support them. This kind of support we want to give them when we try to tell them, look, we're going to help you, is likely to largely help these people and try to convince them that, hey, the world does want to support you. This means we're largely able to actually help these people get out of their depression because they now recognize that there is hope within this world. I say, no more pure eyes. But furthermore, let's recognize how it affects the wider world. Because when other people now see and recognize that, hey, he wants to help this person who commits suicide, this means other people who are contemplating whether or not they should commit suicide will now see that, hey, there are people out there who want to help me. This means there's a likelihood that there are less people who actually decide to commit suicide and actually go through the act. Compared to their world, where everyone is cold and heartless, where everyone now sees that, hey, nobody wants to help me. That's when we think more people are likely to commit suicide because they see no hope, they see no one out there to actually support them. That's why we're not willing to take that chance. But two, let's recognize on the second argument. How does it create extra pressure for support structures we talked about? One, what do we mean by this? You need to recognize that many individuals out there in this kind of world, it shows that they are supportive and actually want to help these people get back on their feet. No individual who try to save that person and tell him, yeah, go back being depressed and continue suffering. These kind of people are more likely than not want to help these people and make sure they get out of their depression. What does this mean then? Two, when we recognize that the authorities are also taking the step in trying to save them, it means the authorities recognize, because in some cases, maybe it was the authorities' fault, the government's fault, for not providing enough jobs to make sure that these people could continue living. What does this mean? Two, we need to recognize that other than showing that these people actually care about them, it means now that there's higher pressure, when you've got a lot more people recognizing that we need to do something about these people who are committing suicide, especially those that we just saved from the brink of death. What does it mean? It means it's more likely that a lot more people are likely to create more lobbies and more political power to push the government to actually enact support structures and enact legislation that can actually help these people who are in need. But furthermore, we need to recognize that now that the government recognizes and actively takes a step to support them, it means the government recognizes that it has a duty to protect these people and won't just leave them hanging after we save them. It means government does have a natural incentive. Why is this better compared to the other side? Because under the other side, people just continuously allow these people to die because apparently, why not let them die? This means there's less incentive, less push from governments alone to actually want to create more support structures to help them after we rescue them. This means you create a world where more people die, where more people suffer. We're absolutely proud to oppose.
closing government is the house in this debate to tell you about how side opposition is the one that harms these vulnerable individuals even more. So even if this is the side of the house that gets to save these people and make them live the life that they don't want to, extending from our opening government already said, we tell you about how you make them even more depressed when you label them as individuals that are irrational, when these are people that are always going to be labeled as people that are mentally unstable. Let's talk about opening opposition, I want to tell you. Because the whole idea of support structure and rehabilitation is something that's already flawed. People that commit suicide is something that's already a last resort. Meaning, if support structure were to exist, meaning if people were to already see kindness within society, these are people that were already opt to the rehabilitation and the support structure that they wanted to talk to. Having the courage to stand on the top of the building and drop down, we don't think that it's something that's an irrational decision or something that is made out of a split second. Meaning, these are individuals that are also individuals that actually made this decision and decided that the only way they want to live a happier life, or the way in which they think that the only life, the way in which they think that the life they're living now is something that is terrible and they're willing to do so. Kindness and support structure can still exist anyway. Meaning, if there are people that chose to opt into this support structure and they think there's still hope and kindness within the world, these are people that already opt into the support structure anyway. But people that were to commit suicide are people that will never opt into the support structure. They are people that already think that there's no kindness within the world. We don't think that your support structure argument will run anyway. Your rehabilitation is something that is redundant. But for these people that want to commit suicide or think that there's no hope in life anyway. There's no hope in life anyway. But the idea about how it came out here is to say that how less people will go out there and commit suicide, right? We don't think so. Because people that already wanted to commit suicide are people that you will not be able to change. So given that even under your best case scenario, that these are people that you get to save at the end of the day, we tell you that how you put even more depression on the depression that they already have within status quo now. No thank you. But the idea when they came up here to say that how they will feel that the world is against them and now they see a form of kindness, we don't think so. Meaning the act of you going out there to stop that individual to kill himself is already an act for them to feel that the world is something that is against them. Meaning the only decision that I'm being proud to make because of my shit life that I've lived previously and I'm willing to jump down the building to end my life and you are there to stop me means the more the message that you send out towards the society is more likely for these people to believe that this world is more likely against me because you're just not willing to respect any form of decision or any form of choice that I'm willing to make. So even if my decision is one that is rational, is one that is legitimate, that has already gone through many forms of calculus, I'm willing to jump down the building and end my life, your side of the house delegitimize that choice. You force them to live in a life that they're not willing to live and something that they never consented to, but your side of the house makes it far worse. Yes.
So can you guarantee that everybody who wants to suicide has gone through all of the action calculus that you just described?
Okay, so even if we are individuals that did not go through those forms of risk calculus and your side of the house are people that will be the same, then we will tell you that why it's still harmful under side opposition paradigm. Firstly, on the first extension, to nuance to you on what does this norm actually mean, right? When this norm actually, when there's this narrative that these are always individuals and authorities that will go out there and stop you, it portrays to you that the idea that means that committing suicide is something that is harmful and you delegitimize every single individual that actually wants to go out there and commit suicide. You tell them that it's wrong for you to do so. But what is the narrative that you then sign out to society and how you make these situations far worse? Meaning that individuals that chose to commit suicide will always be labeled as individuals that are stupid because they did not want to listen to whatever that was happening previously. People that were already there to actively stop you to do so, but you still chose to do so, is more likely for people to discriminate you even more, or for these people to feel that there's even lesser hope within the society. Within society, your side of the house makes the depression even worse. Meaning that the problems that are already facing within status quo are problems that you already cannot face because rehabilitation is something that won't help them anyway. But you add on even more depression or even more harm towards these individuals when you tell them that your choice is something that is wrong, even if they inherently believe that it's something that is correct. The perception towards this individual is forever going to be something that is bad. But as what opening opposition portrays, that these are authorities that are so powerful and so influential, it further empowers the narrative that these are choices that are wrong and these are choices that we should never want to support. But what is the comparative analysis coming from side closing government that we will win? Meaning, even under our paradigm, people will die and less people will save. At least these are people that are already for them to live a life that they don't want to live. But also, at least on the outside, people will then be respected on this form of choice. Because the norm that you stand out that these are people that definitely need to be saved, because these are all individuals that are being irrational, is something that we are not willing to consent to. Yes.
Stop being extreme and absolutist. So if you are able to save, say, 50% of them, isn't it that then better than your side, where every single person who has hope all dies?
Your side of the house that will be able to say that 50% will tell you why the life that you will have to live is something that is bad. Because the integration that you wanted to talk about is something that will never be able to happen. So given that these are individuals that can continue to live in society, these are individuals that the society will constantly go on there and believe that these are people that are stupid, these are irrational human beings, and these are people that are mentally unstable. We don't think that this is something that we want to push. And this is why we are different from opening, right? Because opening told you this about how discrimination would happen towards people that did not choose to save or just did not have the capability to save these people. But we tell you on why discrimination would happen to these vulnerable individuals and make them far worse. What will society's perception then be? These vulnerable people are going to be doubted and constantly be stupid. Meaning, if these are individuals that are actually smart and make that rational decision to do so, can never be able to prove themselves, to prove that they make the correct decision. You label them as people that are constantly being problematic. You label them as people that are being extreme because of the norm that you push upon them. But secondly, how to also make their situations far worse. Meaning, it's not just about what opening government said about the problems are constantly going to exist, but you also embrace even more problems upon them. You even embrace even more reasons for them to hate the world, because the world is not letting them do whatever they want. If they inherently believe that committing suicide is the only way for them to do so, and your world under such opposition paradigm is one that will make them live a life that they don't want to, but will never be proud of to live.
The opening houses seem to have a weird fetish regarding prison and rehabilitation of suicidals. Closing up and closing off will debate. We'll talk about death, we'll talk about suffering, we'll talk about the metrics of suffering, and we'll talk about suicide. I think the opening government has a problem with the way we treat suicidals, but I'm not here to discuss that. In my extensions, I will tell you a few important things. One, why suicide is a huge decision and often requires a counter narrative in the form of other people being there. Secondly, I'll tell you 3 things that happen when you don't stop suicide. I'm going to integrate a lot of it. 1, why is suicide inherently a huge decision? 5 levels to this. The first thing we will say is that you think you consent to suicide and you think you consent to the great beyond. But the truth is, you can never really evaluate what's at the end of the tunnel. You can never really evaluate what you don't know and have no empirical evidence of in comparison to your life now. Sure, your life sucks. Sure, your life can be better, but you can't objectively make that decision yourself, given that you don't know the nature of what happens after this. 2, we think if your life is bad, things often get better. Things like emotional pain, things like depression, things like economical hardship, no thank you. All of these things get better over time. All of these things have possibilities and are open to change. You deny every avenue of that by taking the easy way out, by saying that I want my happiness and I want it now. That's bad. 3, we think even if your life is horrible and you are a bad student in MCKL who doesn't win debate championships, my family, your family derives familial value from you. This means the people around you, your friends, your teammates, your cousins, your family, everyone who knows you, basically derives some sort of value and has integrated some part of their life with yours. You can't say that you are nobody's happiness, and you can't say that you exist as an individual in this world to be selfish. No, thank you. 3, we think all of the things they say are ultra convenient. Can you guarantee me that every suicide that's going to happen there is a product of a rational deliberation? We don't think so. We think people often suicide for different things. People in South Korea in an extremely competitive academic environment, suicides for getting 8 E's, people who get 5 A's and 1 B suicide due to the environment in which they're in. The difference and the delineation closing off will make is that people often suicide as a result of uncontrollable despair and anguish. Things like breakup, things like losing lottery, all of these things might feel as if your life is at an end, but we need people to convince you otherwise, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, so you kind of have to hang on a bit more. Lastly, we think suicide is a bad, huge decision. Sorry, not bad. Because there are often other alternatives that you have to explore. Let's take your best case. All of the things that you talk about, horrible, no way out, avenue, explore everything. Sure, you can say that, but how can you guarantee that every person out there will have full information, will have exhausted all possible alternatives and avenues to make their life better? You can't do that. The truth is, people often suicide on spur of the moment, heated emotions kind of things. You can't guarantee what happens underneath your side of the house. No, thank you. We would say, sure, maybe some people have legitimate reasons to end their life, but doing so and removing this norm and regretting it means now people will be able to end their lives at a whim. And we need to set a slippery slope for whoever feels as if they're in suffering to die. No, thank you. So even in the best case, we still win. It's about the greater good. Sure, we'll trade up Johailee's extension. Maybe some people will hate the world. Maybe they want to suicide, but they will chain up or something. The point is, a lot of other people are in suffering, and the point in which you don't care about their suffering and the avenues which you use to alleviate it is also the method in which most people will take the easy way out. We need to care for people in suffering. Secondly, why is it bad to not stop suicide? I have 3 extensions here. 1, fluidity of consent. Your consent at the beginning of an act does not mean necessarily that you consent to the entirety. You saying that you are poor and you probably want to find a way out does not mean you consent to the possibility of choosing going to heaven or hell at the end of the day. We think people often think about the actual magnitude of their decisions at the precipice of making those decisions. That is the reason why people often get cold feet on the day before the wedding, or people often doubt themselves before a huge business merger or a deal. There needs to be an avenue to accommodate this fluidity of consent. There needs to be someone at that point when the person is about to jump and feel the terrible pain to allow it to talk that person out of it, right? Because the likelihood is, without that person or without that authority being there, that person will jump anyway. That person will feel 1 second of uncontrollable pain, and 1 life will be taken away from the world, which could have been used to make the world better. Yes.
A normal individual fears to cut his or her wrist because death is not a consequences we want, and we fear death. Given that these individuals opt into suicide, it's very reasonable to say that they already have exhausted every single alternative, right? Why is it fair for you to arbitrarily decide for them and define them and make a blanket policy saying that they are still irrational and they're still stupid?
You actually believe that? You actually believe that students who suicide because of academic results have exhausted all possible alternatives? Or have you believed that Ben losing a tournament has exhausted every other alternative? We don't think so. We think even if some people do it, a large majority of people don't properly weigh up their options. 2, what is the problem? Why do we not regret this norm? We think you highlight the problem and help it to gain a bit of traction. Why is it a norm to stop people who are suiciding in the first place? It's naturally inbred in all of us to be a part of death and what it brings. What does this mean? People who stop other people from suiciding are horrified by the world which we live in. At the point in which you are completely fine with allowing people to suicide, is also the point in which you accept there is a level of suffering that people can opt out from. This reduces any incentive to alleviate the suffering, given that you give them the avenue and silver platter and don't do anything to stop them. Lastly, this is important. We think people evaluate their happiness and their metrics of suffering relatively based on other people's feelings. So I might be ultra sad, but that's the reason why someone who tells me about their problems makes me feel a bit better, because there is somebody at the bottom. Like it or not, every society has to have a lowest common denominator, and someone always has to suffer. You telling them that they can suicide would eliminate that common denominator. What would happen? We think the metrics of what a good life are and the metrics of what a happy life are would scale upwards. So first it will be the bottom tier. Second, it will be the second bottom tier. The suffering would scale upward and more people would die. So at the end of the day, you don't defend anyone, you defend the extinguishing of the human race. We think people are selfish and they base their happiness off other suffering. Insofar as some people
some people stay in this world and don't suicide. We are willing to trade off the people who take the world for the sake of people who will and look into all other alternatives. Thank you.
We are totally fine with individuals choosing to opt out of certain problems. We are totally fine with people legitimately choosing to end their life because they believe there's just way too much for them to go through. Right? Here's how I'm going to do my whip speech. First, I'm going to take out closing opposition and whatever they brought up in their extension. Then I'll take down opening opposition. I'll do all this, like extending Johailee's extension and actually telling you what she said and using it. So let's take a look at what closing opposition said, right? Because they told us how eventually lives of these individuals will get better. Now, this doesn't make sense, right? Because they questioned us a lot on how we can guarantee certain things for this individual. Well, we pushed the question back because how can you actually guarantee that every single victim can actually get a better life after this, right? But even if, and we take them at their best case scenario, even if their life does somehow miraculously get better and they do move on from the problems, here is why it is still bad, right? Here's why it's still harmful. Because even if they move on from those exact same problems that pushed them to suicide in the first place, something opening government already talked about, here's what's most important. Because people will forever portray these individuals as those who are crazy, as those who should be in a mental asylum, as those who are incapable of actually coping with pressure. We believe this means that their life is still hell and that people will still look down upon these individuals. Now we believe if you agree that the individuals living in an asylum after going through all this rehab it's better for them to die. We believe it's better for them to die here as well because their lives will still be bad. We don't see any form of integration, right? But let's take a look at another thing they said, because they came up here and both opposition benches talked a lot on this whole idea of irrationality, right? We believe you are the side that generalizes every single individual to be irrational. You are the side that says every single person who wants to commit suicide is someone who's crazy as someone who is irrational. This means that people who legitimately wanted to die and those who made that rational choice will never be recognized, right? But ultimately on this whole idea of rationality, we have to realize that this is something which is subjective, which means no one can actually determine what is a rational choice and what is an irrational choice. But in the scenario here, where someone has to draw the line, we believe it's so much better for this victim to do so. We'd rather have the victim draw the line as to what's an irrational and what is a rational choice, because this is the person who's going through the problems. This is the person who's losing their family members. This is the person who feels they have no urge to continue life whatsoever. Even if you force help down their throat, it is ultimately pointless, right? But let's take a look at something else they said, because this is something that doesn't make sense. When they told us how, on this whole idea of consent, and how people make a rational choice right before they jump off the cliff, right before they step in front of that train and die, they would get that click and make that rational choice. Now, we believe this doesn't make sense, right? Because these are people who obviously consented into dying. But let's take their logic at the best case scenario. If these are individuals who get that rational choice right before they die, and they still choose to commit suicide, we believe that is then a rational choice, right? If they are saying that a choice right before you die is a rational one, and these people continue to step in front of that train, we tell you it is a rational choice. You have to recognize, right? But ultimately, this is a decision which these individuals make, and ultimately, you have to respect it as a whole. sit down. Then they told us on how people judge pain relatively, right? Because they conceded that you can never relate to it, so we look at it relatively. Well, we believe that it already proves, right, that you can never relate to it. So if you can't even relate to the problem properly, how can you then say that these people are crazy? How can you then say that these people are irrational? We don't see it illogical. But even if we take them at their best case scenario, so does that mean that now if someone is at the lowest point of suffering, you're in your table of suffering, right? Is it then legitimate for these individuals to die? Is it legitimate for these people to commit suicide? Because according to your table of how much people suffer, these people suffer the most. We tell you it doesn't make sense. Closing opposition.
So actually, don't you think the absence of a counter narrative makes suicide more accessible to the average reasonable person?
Look, I didn't even take that POI in the first place, so like let's just pretend it didn't happen because it did. Okay, so let's take like opening opposition, right? Because opening opposition wanted to tackle 3 main benefits. Here's why they won't happen. Because the 3 benefits they wanted to take, let's tackle each and every one of them. So firstly, they say how lesser people would opt into suicide because now they see more forms of support, right? But before that, sure.
So your main harm, suicide harm is that people would shame these people who wanted to commit suicide. Tell me why everyone would want to shame them when the world we live in is one where we actively try to save them because we care for them and sympathize for them.
People will shame them because people don't care what these people go through. People don't understand the problems which these victims go through. People don't experience it. Both sides conceded, both benches conceded to it. We don't see why you're still arguing, right? But let's take a look at the benefits that they still have, right? Even if it's still there. So let's take a look at what they said. They said that lesser people will opt into suicide because they now see more forms of support. Now, 2 responses. Number 1, we tell you that supporting structures already exist. We see so many posters telling you not to kill yourself, people around you telling you to stay alive and be amongst us, right? However, these individuals don't care. These individuals who want to commit suicide, they know that that poster is there, yet they still choose to leap off the top of it because they believe it's something that is most suitable to them. They see these supporting structures as parties which don't truly understand what they're going through, right? So obviously the existence of supporting structures doesn't matter whatsoever, but even if lesser people who kill themselves, here's why it's still bad, and it will all lead to the same conclusion. The idea of how people who attempt to kill themselves, they don't do anything and they won't go for rehab and things like that, like this. Yes, number 1, it means that these are people who naturally don't want help whatsoever. These are people who already won't go for rehab. So what makes you think that you forcing rehab down their throat, you forcing help towards them is actually going to be effective? If I don't want to do something and you force me to do so, then I tell you I won't do it properly, it won't be effective, it's ultimately pointless. But let's take a look at the biggest point on integration, right? 3 responses. Number 1, we tell you there is no integration whatsoever because Johailee already told you why people will continuously discriminate these individuals. They'll forever be seen as incapable and stupid. We believe these are attachments that will forever be stuck upon these individuals, even if they've moved on, even if they made their rational choice in the first place, right? In the end, their life is still hell. All their benefits are contingent upon the fact that they can move on from the problem. We tell you that they cannot move through this problem, but even if they do, their life still sucks.
The reason why in society today, we have a lot of things that are taboo. It exists as so is because we really do not want people being happen. Because the counter narrative is so high, in order to counter react the magnitude of the decisions people are making.
Given the fact that Thai government chooses to disregard the magnitude at which the person is willing to forego any single shred of possibility of any form of happiness, that means that there needs to exist a counter narrative to advise a person that there is a possibility of life. Even if there may be no such possibility, there are individuals out there who have never exercised their ultimate choice. And for those individuals who there is a possibility, we are willing to save these individuals. Forget those who already died. Before I move on to my issues, I think there exists a couple of problematic things about the debate so far. Number one, we are not fine with jail for people who commit suicide. So like, we regret the norm of sending people who commit suicide to jail, but we don't regulate the norm of like stopping them from actually suiciding. Two, if rehab exists in a manner that is insulting, that is painful to people who suicide, then we are for the idea of better rehabs towards individuals. The point of this discussion is, for individuals who attempt suicide, is it justifiable for us to stop that attempt of suicide, to give them a form of counter-narrative? On that debate, we are willing to argue. First issue in this debate, the issue of consent and whether or not a person is particularly informed and started to sit down. We think that there are three issues, there are three questions that need to be answered. Firstly, is it true that you are at your worst point of your life? Number two, is it true that things are never going to get better? And lastly, is your choice legitimate? We don't think so. We think that closing gulf things is a problem if a lot of people find your choice to be bad and if people start to discriminate you. We don't actually see that as a problem given the fact that you're already dead. But more importantly, why do we think that your choice is poor in nature? Firstly, we think there are a lot of individuals, and can't explicitly state this, there are a lot of individuals base their standard of living and their quality of life relative to a lot of other people. That means that the poor man only lives a sad life because he doesn't have the riches of a rich man. This is a comparative illustration in which a person will only obtain happiness if he is able to gain relative success in comparison to a lot of people. But it also means on an emotional level that the person's feelings, if it's not the worst in comparison to other people, that means the person is less likely going to want to terminate his life. If you look at it properly, I can't give you an explicit example. When you talk about people who are in a bad situation, when you talk about people who have gone through a lot of pain, when they form support groups, when they find other individuals who also share that same feeling, they feel lesser of pain, they are able to continue to move on. This is an example in which individuals have an emotional bond with other people, in which the same emotions then be able to alleviate the form of suffering. Why is this something that's important in this debate? It means that there are certain individuals within societies that may live within bubbles, that may live within spheres, that disallow them from exercising the complete options that they have. What does this mean? I'll give you examples of people who have pressure due to exam and they suicide. But these examples can extend to a plethora of situations in which there's always an option outside of your bubble in which you're able to exercise. No thank you. We think that that option may never necessarily exist, and for that reason, for individuals who do not have that option, and because they are willing to forego a life that has the potential of improving the existence of your own, your person, we think it's a lot better if you are able to save that one person than forego the rest of whatever harm that they talk about. But secondly, more importantly, we need to know a couple of things. Like when you talk about consent, we don't think that consent always exists right to the very end. There exists a possibility in which individuals may not want to consent all the way to the very end. When Carl argued to you how your consent may be different at the precipice, at the point in which the magnitude of what you're willing to forego becomes very apparent. When you stand on the point, when you stand on top of a building and you're willing to jump, we think that is the point in which that's the point in which you actually consider what you're going to forego, because it's going to hurt a lot, because you really then consider every other option. Why is this something that's important? Because at that point in time, there could exist a possibility that you choose not to suicide. There exists a possibility where you really want to opt out. Under these situations, where everyone doesn't give a damn, when everyone chooses not to save you, when everyone actually thinks it's normal for you to go through the process, you then become someone who's a victim of your own poor decision making. And that is an example in which society needs to exist, there needs to exist a counter narrative for individuals to come and be able to save you. We think that option needs to exist for individuals. No, thank you. But lastly, ladies and gentlemen, this is an even if. Okay, so even if not every we don't contend for closing up that everyone is poor decision makers, or everyone will never be able to exercise the option. But at the end of the day, you have to understand the magnitude of the decision in this. When you talk about individuals who are willing to forego existence, meaning they deny any possibility of actually gaining happiness in life. Like you do not know what actually happens at the end of the day. Why is it something that is bad? It's very bad because if we have few individuals out there who we can be able to save, we would rather save these individuals rather than like letting everybody die and not actually allowing anyone from getting any form of happiness. No, thank you, sit down. Second issue is debate. The traction in garnering support for other people's suffering. And this is extremely important for Kawa, which has completely disregarded in this debate. We think what's extremely important is like the norm at which we judge other people's suffering. We think if it's okay for you to walk by a building and see a man jump down and splat on the floor. We think if it's okay for you to tell us that it's okay, if they say it's okay for you to see a poor man dying as a viable solution out of poverty, we think that it becomes less important for you to want to care. It becomes less important because you feel less compassion, you feel less care towards individuals who are willing to terminate their very own existence. Because mind you, these people are at a point in which their non-existence actually means a lot more than their existence. So you care a lot less for these individuals because you no longer feel that the death of these individuals actually matters. Because it's actually very logical if you think about it. If you no longer care about people who are suiciding, which you no longer care about the fact that they are openly dying and they are willing to terminate their own very existence. Means you care less about the problem which causes this individual to actually want to die because you legitimize the fact that dying is a viable solution to the problem. How is it better on the outside when there is active support generated to make sure these people don't die? When there's a lot of coverage and a lot of traction, a lot of discourse on whether such a person deserves to die, whether such a person should be stopped from dying, we think then only is there attraction generated rather than seeing a poor man like hang himself, rather than see you just driving by the bridge and see somebody fall into the sea. Why is this something that is a lot better than closing government's extension? Closing government's extension predicated on the basis that we need to recognize individuals' rights. We should not shame an individual for making a choice. We don't think so, ladies and gentlemen. We think it's a lot worse when you do not recognize individual suffering as of it is. We think it's a lot worse in status quo when if individuals just walk by a dying man and do not give a damn. When they can have dinner with the neighbor next door is suiciding. We think that is a world we do not want to live in. When the pain and suffering that causes the death of a person is too little of the harm.
Yeah,